Miracle on 34th Street was released in 1994 and is a remake of the 1947 black and white classic. And in many ways it is the same movie, with slight alterations as it's brought into the more modern time, or the more modern time of 1994. And this movie stars Richard Attenborough, who in my opinion plays one of the best Santa Claus ever put to screen. Dory Walker, an event director for the department store Kohl's, is forced to fire a Santa Claus directly before the parade due to him being drunk. Luckily, an elderly gentleman named Kris Kringle, who was giving the drunk Santa a good telling off, agrees to be Kohl's Santa and appear in the parade. After he does such a good job, he is asked by Dory to be their full-time Santa Claus, and he agrees, but only if he can wear his own Santa suit, because you see, Kris Kringle claims to be the real Santa Claus.
He thinks you're Santa Claus. I am.
Kris is a massive hit for Kohl's despite sending customers elsewhere to find toys at a cheaper price. Meanwhile, Dory's young daughter Susan is taken to see Santa at Kohl's by a returning neighbour and love interest Brian, only she has been told by her mother that Santa does not exist, creating a challenge for Kris Kringle to make her mother and daughter believe. Unfortunately, Kris has some more problems ahead of him as he is set up by rival department store who have discovered that he truly believes he is the one and only Santa. Kris is then provoked by the drunk Santa from the beginning of the movie, who fakes an injury claiming Kris struck him with his cane. Now, with the help of Brian, Dory and Susan, as well as Kohl's department store, Kris must prove his innocence and that he is indeed Santa Claus and not just a crazy old man. Like I said before, compared to the original movie, this movie did have some alterations. The biggest one being that in this movie, Macy's wouldn't allow their name to be used because they felt that the black and white original, which they featured in, was more of a Christmas classic and could never be outdone, but I think this remake proved them wrong. So instead of using Macy's as their department store, they made up a fictitious one called Kohl's, which I must admit I always thought was a real department store in America. It just seems so convincing to me, and it still to this day I find it hard to believe that a Kohl's does not exist, but it doesn't. And like I said before, Richard Attenborough absolutely plays this part to perfection. He is most definitely a Santa Claus that I would want to believe in. He is the embodiment of everything that is good, which nowadays is a rare thing. When you see someone playing Santa Claus, they always have to have an edge. They always have to make Santa seem a little bit darker and a little bit funnier, but Richard Attenborough's version is the Santa Claus that I would want to believe in. And of course we have the amazing performance of Mara Wilson, who plays little Susan, who at this point was probably best known for starring in Mrs. Doubtfire, and she would become a more recognisable face throughout the 90s. I would say the movie that people recognise her from the most is Matilda, but for me, it's this movie, Miracle on 34th Street. And I truly believe this. If it was any other child actor in this role, I still think the movie would be good, but I don't think it would hit the same. Mara Wilson, as a young actress, was absolutely, utterly charming. And I think if I can give you one reason why I like this movie so much, it's because you have to have faith that Santa Claus exists. The movie does not tell you directly that Santa Claus exists. It's up to you to choose whether he does or whether he doesn't. And in this movie, you will not see Santa do Santa things. You will not see him climbing down chimneys. You won't see him riding his sleigh pulled by reindeer. You won't see him using any kind of Christmas magic. This movie keeps you guessing up until the end whether this man actually is Santa or whether he is just a crazy, delusional old man who believes he is Santa. And I think that makes it so much better. But that's the whole point of this movie. It's built around faith that Kris is in fact Santa Claus, and I think although we do know that he is the real deal, we do know that he is Santa Claus, the movie never makes it abundantly clear, and I love it for that. But what Kris does bring to the table is his very own Santa suit, which is apparently the real deal. He can speak many different languages to many different children, and there's also a scene in the movie where he talks to a deaf girl by using sign language, and it's absolutely heartwarming. It's probably the best scene in the entire movie.
You are a very beautiful young lady.
And some of my other favourite scenes are actually at the end of the movie when we get the court case, when they're trying to prove that Kris Kringle is in fact Santa Claus. It's some really good movie magic just laid right there on the screen. I love court case movies. I love A Time to Kill, I love My Cousin Vinny, so to see actually Santa Claus on trial and they're trying to prove that he is a real deal is quite exciting actually for me. And there are some really funny scenes where Kris is asked about his workshops and he insists that they exist but they can't be seen because they're in the dream world, not in the physical world. They also ask him to make the reindeer fly in court, and he says that he can't because they only fly on Christmas Eve. But of course, in the end, they win the case in the best possible way when Susan presents the judge with a Christmas card with a $1 bill inside, which reads upon the bill, "In God We Trust." And by reading this, he realizes if people have blind faith that God exists, then they must also have blind faith that Santa Claus exists, and he exists in the embodiment of Kris Kringle, who is sat right there in the courtroom. And I think it is a perfect ending, and it's just brilliantly done. And I believe this movie works so well because you don't get any hard evidence by the end of the movie that he is in fact Santa Claus or not. You have to have faith that he is Santa Claus, just like in real life. You have to have faith that Santa Claus exists. I believe. Do you?